I would like to introduce Jordan Villarreal, who will be presenting Uncommon Paths to Beginning Network Automation. Jordan is a technical advocate at NetBox Labs and is coming to us today from Northwest Indiana. This is Jordan's first time presenting at NANOG, as well as his first time at NANOG. It is a pleasure to have him speaking with us today, and welcome, Jordan.
All right. Good afternoon. So before I start, I want to preface my conversation here as more of a conversation and less of a technical piece. So we're not going to get deep into code or anything like that. This is more of a conversation starter. So a bit of a background on myself. I'm technical advocate at NetBox Labs. I've been in networking as a network engineer for a little over 20 years, mostly in healthcare and manufacturing, some time in licensure as well. We've got all the standard certificates that you typically expect, and I'm struggling with automation, just like everyone else. And the question is why? Because automation is hard, right? It's not easy. Insert a lot of different reasons why network automation is hard. But I'm going to propose a two-part hypothesis today that it's not the function of performing network automation that's overly difficult in the concept or the application. We're engineers. Our job is to take technical problems and to solve them. There are robust tool sets out there. It's not as if there aren't more than a handful number of tools. I think it's tomorrow maybe, there's a conversation around a bunch of different tools that are already out there. We know what the goals are. With automation, engineers are typically trying to do what they're doing already at scale. So we know what we want to do. Vendors are getting better at supporting it. You're starting to see APIs that are baked into the platforms, to the management platforms to make them easier to interact with. Go out and Google. There's tons of examples and there's tons of classes that you can take. So if it's not technically something that we can't achieve, I believe it's more of the introduction, the adoption, and the operationalization of network automation, that's the hard part. That's where we struggle. It's not the technical servers, which are issues. So that means this is a business problem. That means business justification is hard, not technically hard. So my talk is split into two different halves. In the first half here, I'm going to go over what you will generally see as a typical path into automation. And then I'm going to jump into a maturity matrix just to kind of level set where you may be in your automation journey, just to set, okay, we know how we walk that path, we know where we are on this path, and we're going to use those 2 points to jump into the infrequently discussed ways of getting into automation, and a way that I like to change the way that I have conversations that have helped me throughout my career, which I think are equally applicable here. So, our typical path is to be an engineer. Hopefully, we've checked that. Take a small use case for automation. You need to change your SNMP strings globally. And then learn Python, or learn Go. Go is coming up. It's getting more popular, but Python does own the lion's share of automation that's out there. And then automate against that. Like that's typically what you see. That's what you read in the books. That's what you see in the classes. But then after you've finished that book, that YouTube series, whatever it is, then you have to convince the other engineers that they need to embrace automation as well. I can't count the number of engineers who have said, over my dead body, I'm not learning Python. Don't try. And then you also have to convince management to allow you to prioritize automation, to get it into your workflows, to bring it into change management, just the way that you generally do your job. All right, so that's our typical path. Here's our maturity matrix. So you have a network and you fall in somewhere on this path here. So all the way on the left-hand side, you can't do any automation. You have no source of truth, you don't understand the tools, you don't know how to put it together. Then all the way on the right-hand side, you have basically automation paradise. You've hit it, it's baked into your workflows, your entire team is utilizing it. Now level 4 is obviously just a small step behind that to where you can still do a lot of automation or perform a lot of automated tasks, but you're still doing some manual bits in there. I suspect that the majority of people fall in on the level 2 and level 3, somewhere in that gray space where you're a single engineer and you can perform some automation, you can do that basic use case, or you're up in level 3 to where, well, maybe you can do a little bit more, or there's 1 or 2 people on your team who can do a little bit more, but you still can't get it baked into your workflows. So we know where we are in the matrix, we know where the typical path is. Now we're going to jump in and start talking about infrequently discussed methods. There are vendor-provided solutions, which sometimes it feels like a little bit of a forbidden way to think about automation, but I intend to hopefully change thoughts and minds on that. You can buy it, you can outsource for it, or you can insource for it. So I'm going to start with the vendor-provided, which they're rarely billed as an automation-first platform. So there are automated things that you can do within them. So if you look at like Meraki's cloud platform, if you're looking at Cloud Vision, there's the management platforms that are out there. While they aren't, again, billed as automation, they still let you perform automated tasks. And what we're trying to do here is come up with ways or things that we're already using that will allow us to change that conversation when we're having it with somebody else. So it doesn't matter that it's just a taste in there, it still gets you into that environment. Now, they also, when you look at the typical path and you look at the classes and the books, you don't hear them discussed as regularly because they're not vendor agnostic. They're going to only work for Cisco or Juniper or whoever the provider is, but they really are still automation. So my first experience with automation goes back into, we'll call it the mid-2000s, where I first encountered Cisco's wireless after they started bringing the wireless controllers online. And you didn't have to deal with autonomous access points all over the place. You didn't have to worry about, are my SIDs correct? Are my channels correct? Is my strength correct? The controller was taking care of that for you. And we could probably have an academic argument over what is automation and what is orchestration. But if the idea is that you have told a thing, the controller, to go out there and perform all of these other tasks, which is what the controller is doing, you still end up in a place where you don't have to go touch all the access points. So that is the core idea here, is that, okay, now management is accustomed to wireless not taking a long time because you have this platform and you've had it for so long. So when you're having automation conversations, it's very easy to reframe something like that into a use case for why you should be able to pursue additional automation. Like, you can't go back and say, all right, we're going to manage access points the old-fashioned way. That would be crazy. So let's try and adopt what they're already doing there and scale that out through the network. All right, so that's one way. You can buy it. And by buying it, I mean there are different vendors out there that produce automation enablement software where it's low, no code, which sometimes is a bit of a gimmicky term, but really the idea is you don't have to drop into Python, into an IDE directly, and create this handcrafted artisanal script to make automation work. That you can buy some of these softwares that are vendor agnostic. They still require you to understand some programming logic, You have to understand how loops work and what variables are and how to make your way through that. But ultimately, it gives you a path in to where, okay, now I don't at least have to write all the code, but then they'll take it further and help you bridge into additional systems or let you bring it into those other processes that you're trying to integrate automation to. So this is an easier way to say, well, you don't have to be the engineer on the island on your own trying to put this together, that you can just consume an automation solution, and it won't be 100%, but if you're at 0% and this gets you halfway there, then, well, at least you're halfway there. The next is outsource, and I'm going to be very specific here. What I mean is you're outsourcing the uplift, not the staff. This isn't, we're going to replace engineers and bring in an outsourced shop that's going to do all of our automation for you. This is more akin to when an organization might be buying a new platform. So you've gone out and you've bought the latest and greatest data center fabric, and your VAR is going to help you bring it into your environment. They're going to pair you with project managers and technicians and help you design it and bring it in. So whoever you buy your hardware from, see if they have an automation practice that can help get you off the ground with automation as a project, again, rather than just being the individual engineer out there trying to do it on your own. So what you end up with are a lot of the benefits of when you adopt a hardware platform like that your engineers don't have to retool and retrain from the ground up. Hopefully you're able to work with a group that can come in and help develop that practice for you, help establish that practice, understand your business needs, and bring their automation knowledge into it. And then what should happen, which hopefully happens when you do the hardware type project, is that your staff starts to learn that process and it builds up to a handoff point, and then you're running it on your own. So it's a path through, but again, remember what we're trying to do is come up with alternative ways to get in that probably haven't been considered as much. The very last one here, and this is my favorite, is to insource for it. And by insource, I mean hire somebody. Ultimately, it scales better over time because that is your resource now, and you can pair them directly with your teams to help them grow that practice. So then what you've done is taken the network engineer and say, well, you don't have to know automation. You don't have to know how to do it. All you need to know is how to be a network engineer, and then you have a conversation with a programmer who's going to help you develop those tool sets. Ultimately, when you have those skills, those tool sets internally, it saves time, it saves money, and it may not be super common, but there are groups out there that have taken this approach and it has paid off in dividends. So if you're not familiar with, I would encourage you to go out and Google Major League Baseball and network automation. So something that MLB did a few years ago is they hired a programmer, and he did have some networking background, so he wasn't a complete novice to networking, but his passion had become development and programming, and they paired him with the network engineering team, and they just kind of started developing tools. And that's what the automation team ended up being, was more of a custom tool creator for the network engineering team. And I don't remember the exact year that they started doing that, but this has scaled to the point now where it's an entire team and they're starting to pivot away from networking and bringing automation to the rest of the MLB. So it's something that I would like to see more of within the industry because it can be very successful. All right, so those are 4 different ways that we can have that conversation. Another way to get into automation that tends to get dismissed is through a different point in what's generally viewed as a CICD pipeline like this. So any of the books or the classes, they're going to teach this sort of from the ground up. You're going to start around planning. You're going to wrap yourself around until you've gone all the way through the infinity symbol and come back around to the top. You don't have to start there. So if the books are saying, well, you have to start here because how can you code without a plan? What you've got to realize, if this is what you're going towards, that a pipeline is not a functional pipeline until every piece is in. And I'm not saying that this is the most efficient path. I'm actually saying the opposite of that. I know it's not the most efficient path. But if you haven't been able to put it in yet, and you're still struggling to, well, how do we get to plan? Well, start from a different point within that pipeline. Now, it's okay to start on the right-hand side, on the CD, on the continuous development side, within the deploy section. Because going back to the vendor-provided solution, where if you're using something like Meraki and you need to, well, you're deploying from there, so you're already collecting that information. That's sort of becoming your quasi-source of truth that you can start beginning to assemble your larger source of truth for your entire deployment. Or you can start at monitor. You need to improve your monitoring. Just, okay, this is how we check if things are up or down. Start at monitoring because you still need to build that up. And again, it's a little piecemeally, but you can still get there. Just realize that you don't have to start at plan to achieve a full CI/CD pipeline within automation. The last bit is how engineers can change the way that they talk to business leaders, because the languages are usually a little bit different. Because as an engineer, you're more feature focused, or at least I am. I should say I'm more feature focused as an engineer. But business leaders are more focused on that story. They need that for their job, but obviously it works against them when they need to communicate to say, okay, what does the engineer want? But that's just part of that communication dynamic. So what I have done, so actually, sorry, I got a slide ahead of myself there. So I'm going to change the story here and be the engineer and do the thing that you don't like to do, which is go to the all hands in the town hall meetings and listen to those division heads, listen to their pain points and reflect their terminology back to them. And this was a difficult thing for me, was to begin to purposely care about what impacts them. Because those are the business leaders. They're the one that's connected to what the business is doing, and you need to connect with them in order to start convincing them how to get automation into those pipelines. So this is my approach, and it took me the majority of my career to come up with how I go about doing things like this. The first thing that I do when telling a story is I avoid numbers larger than 100. And that really stops me from getting into trying to over-describe a feature. Now, if it's a finance conversation, okay, maybe those numbers need to go up over 100. But when you're trying to tell the story about, or when I'm trying to tell the story about why I want this or why this is good, sticking to percentages and multiples of things helps me tell that story a little bit more succinctly. I also try to retell that story backwards from their point of view. I don't know how many people have had the privilege of interacting with small children, but they like to ask why a lot. So play that game with yourself, starting from their position. Ask, why do they want this? Why do they want that? And try and work back to that point where now you've connected your story to their story. I also had to take a lot of time to work on my empathy to understand their point of view. As an engineer, I was always too frequently dismissive of end user complaints or issues that they were describing. And it got to a point where I needed to take a step back from myself so that I could help understand their point of view, to help understand their story, to start pitching these more cutting edge tech, next new hot thing that we wanted to install. And I would literally write a story using full sentences, something that you would submit to a professor in college that all right, and I'm not saying a book report, a 30-page book report, but really put it down in words so that you have purposefully and ahead of time connected all of those parts together to where you can change the way that you tell that story back to them. So, in closing, if any of this resonated with you, I believe it's because you recognized a part of this in your automation journey. And I hope that you realize there's no right way, there's no wrong way through it. There's just the way that's going to have to work for you in your organization. So if anything through in here resonated, please feel free to steal any piece of it and use that to develop your own approach to changing these stories and to help get automation into your environments. Because the last bit here on don't give up, if automation is truly to be the path forward, and this is going to be the direction that we are, as engineers are going to have to adopt in the future for how we run our networks, we need to start doing it. We need to start doing it today. We need to start doing it yesterday. So it's a pain. Hopefully there's things in here that can help you get through it. But the more we do it, the more common it becomes. Then that actually becomes our practice going forward. Thank you very much for your time. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
I have a question.
Sure.
Hi, Tony Tauber from Comcast.
Nice to meet
I think you kind of touched on this, or tangentially at least, but I find it seems like a lot of times when people, especially maybe in management, think about automation, they think of it as kind of a capital exercise, like we'll do this thing, we'll get the goodness, and then move on. Whereas I think what's possibly less well appreciated, I don't know if you can give any color or fill in on this, is like what's the ongoing burden of maintenance and adaptation to new things. You change a software release on your network gear, some the API is different, or some other API that you're interacting with. You have to grow, you have to manage any included third-party libraries and whatnot, dependencies. What could you say about that?
It almost pulls me back to the vendor provided bit, because it's not as if those don't exist right now within those vendor provided solutions. It's just something that you have to manage. And there's no doubt about it that if you are generating this from scratch, you are going to have to lean into that and develop some of that your own. Hopefully you can find the right trade-off in there, but what I've found, again, is just trying to really lean into the things that are already working, that are automation, that you didn't develop, and say, well, I understand that it's not one for one today, but just really try and push into that, because what happens if we go back and we get rid of the vendor-provided stuff? Well, then, no one's going to want to do that. So that's how I would be leaning into situations like that.
Right, but so as you go on, you have to keep devoting those resources to maintaining the automation that you've built. Right?
You do, and hopefully that you can get to that in-source point to where you have staff that's doing that. Because again, engineers, there are very few engineers that like get out the big flag and go, "Yay, I got to learn this new thing." So that's why maybe it's a little bit of both of there. Is hopefully you can build it to that in-source point, because you're absolutely right. You're still going to have to manage that. Automation isn't a one and done. It needs to be maintained.
Thanks.
Yep.
I'm not that tall. Josh Oakes, Telstra. I just wanted to thank you for giving this, because so many of the problems we deal with on a day-to-day are not technical. They are organizational and communication. The only feedback I'd give you on this talk is to change the title, because everything you said there is wonderfully widely applicable to pitching any engineering technical solution to an organization.
Sure.
And
give me a better title.
I have no idea. At first, when I looked down the list, I'm like, network automation. Well, I'm not anywhere near. I'm a sales engineer,
Sure.
solution architect. I'm not anywhere near network automation.
Sure.
But it's like, hey, I do stuff in my home lab. My brain is sizzling on this of all kinds of things. I'm like, ooh, I need to approach that differently. So, thank you.
Absolutely. And just kind of like getting on that topic right there, when I first started thinking about, okay, what could I potentially present at Nanog, and started looking at automation and knowing that they were looking for something automation based, I kind of snapped to that, because you're absolutely right. This is not a widely talked about topic. Go find automation books. Go to whatever bookstore is still brick and mortar around, or Amazon, and look for the book that talks about the business side of it. And maybe in a year or two, that'll be my book with my name on it. But these are the conversations that we need to start having, because the engineers need help getting over that to bring it to life. So thank you. I really appreciate that feedback.
Thank you.
Absolutely.